The wonderful world of Disney will not be seen tonight, so that we may bring you this NBC News special.
For weeks, it has been the story that has moved the world. The citizens of China, led by the young, calling for democracy and change. They defied politicians. They ridiculed the army. Ridicule turned to violence. At first, small fights, then bigger and uglier fights. The standoff was very tense.
Take care of yourself!
Then it exploded. China, which likes to call itself the Middle Kingdom. Tonight, China is a living hell.
This is an NBC News special. China in crisis. With NBC News correspondent Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. We all knew it couldn't go on forever, but no one thought it would come to this. A brutal massacre of Chinese students and other protesters by the Chinese Army, the People's Liberation Army. The death count goes on tonight, and it is at least in the hundreds. It may go as high as 1,000 or more, and the fighting is not yet over. China, which had been trying so hard to persuade the rest of the world that it is now a modern progressive society, is a nation at war with itself. As a result, the world is a much different place tonight. In this program, we'll show you what happened, what's going on right now, the global consequences, the shocked reactions of Chinese in this country, and we'll try to deal with the future of China, although that tonight is very unclear. Let's begin with the situation in Beijing at this hour, where it is daylight Monday morning. NBC's Keith Miller is within sight of Tiananmen Square. Keith, what do you see?
Beijing remains a city under siege this morning and still in shock. All-night tank convoys roamed the city's main avenue and opened fire with machine guns at even a hint of opposition. All highways leading into the city are now occupied and blocked by the army. Most residents and foreigners obeyed orders to stay off the streets or else.
There is still scattered resistance to martial law a full 24 hours after the army brutally crushed student-led demonstrations for freedom and democracy. Dawn Sunday did not bring an end to the killing. Unarmed civilians confronted army units occupying Tiananmen Square. An armored division backed up infantry guarding the symbolic center of communist China. In a compound there, a group of American civilians and reporters were held captive by the army for some 20 hours.
The officers in charge of us told us that it was extremely dangerous outside, and we had reason to believe that what they told us was true, because every few minutes we could hear rounds of gunshots, and the helicopters came by every 15 to 20 minutes.
The massacre is characterized officially as a glorious victory over counter-revolutionary turmoil, but it is shocking to anyone who witnessed it and seems certain to harden opposition to the government. Keith Miller, NBC News, Beijing.
It is Monday morning, and I'm just a few hundred yards from the square. The troops are clearly visible from here. Two lines of them sitting down, behind them backed up by artillery and tanks and armored personnel carriers. There are a few people in the square, but they are not trying to oppose the army. A young man was shot just a few moments ago. He was carried away, apparently shot when he got too close to the barricades. It is an eerie sight at this moment, Tom. The red-tiled roofs of the Forbidden City are contrasting with the camouflage green on the tanks, armored personnel carriers, and troops, thousands of troops stationed opposite it.
Keith, we've been hearing reports all day long that the troops may be ready to move now on Beijing University, which is some distance from Tiananmen Square in the northwestern part of that capital city. Have you heard anything more about that recently?
Well, students had expected some sort of activity overnight and had prepared themselves. We were told they were trying to arm themselves as best they could with the rudimentary instruments, with Molotov cocktails, but they do not have any real weapons to speak of. A lot of students, we are told, have left the campuses and have gone into hiding either in the city or out into the countryside. Something is remarkable here. It's just starting to happen. By bicycle, people are coming by twos and threes, maybe a dozen, coming out to inspect the damage here. They are riding down to the last barricade that was once the defense of the students. It's all burned out now. And they're staring out across at all these troops, thousands of troops. There's no sound. There's no confrontation from them. Disbelief, maybe, and certainly sadness.
Necessary to save lives and property. One official government report characterized the massacre as a glorious victory over counter-revolutionary turmoil. But hardly anyone in this city thinks there's much glory in shooting down unarmed civilians. George Lewis, NBC News, Beijing.
NBC's Arthur Kent is a cameraman as well as a correspondent. He was in the middle of the square when the troops moved in, and tonight he has this first-person account of what it was like.
For weeks, Tiananmen Square had been an exciting place, a daring place. An authoritarian government was challenged in its own front yard. The mood was hopeful, even festive. All that changed yesterday afternoon. Armed troops approached from Beijing suburbs, emerged from hiding just next door. By nightfall, anxiety turned to fear. The battle began on Chang'an, the avenue of heavenly peace. For nearly 2 long hours, students threw stones, burned barricades. The soldiers answered with their rifles and rolled steadily on for Tiananmen.
Take care of you! Take care of yourself!
For a reporter with a camera, some good advice from an underdog. The movement for democratic reform is on the run. The barricades look impressive, but the students fall back, taking heavy casualties. An unexpected prize, an Army APC lost, then cornered. The campaigners for democracy have become a mob, fighting for its life. The Army driver hasn't a chance. The students are losing each step of the way. Even the dead can't be moved quickly enough on the avenue of eternal peace. The Army reaches the square. They pause, prepare for the next push. The chairman looks on, and public order comes from the barrel of a gun. As most people panic, some keep their heads. Medical students turn their clinic into a MASH unit. The troops are closing in. They ignore the gunfire and evacuate the dead and wounded. The Army begins to encircle the square. The battle of wills between the students and hardline leaders is decided. At the Heroes' Monument, silent despair. A blood-stained jacket becomes the movement's newest banner. The students end it as they began, sitting down. The order goes on the loudspeaker. It's no use to resist. There is one place left to turn, to each other.
Today, it's still not clear how many of the young people I left on that monument got out alive, but we are getting more reports of killings committed by government troops after the square was in their hands. Tom?
Arthur, did the students realize the extent of the danger that they were in when the troops began to fire?
I don't think so. Even the day before this occurred, there was a mood in the square of uncertainty that this occupation could go on for some time. Certainly the students had no idea that the government would take this most harshest of steps against them, and you didn't see, even after nightfall, even when it was obvious that troops were moving in, students anxiously preparing any kind of weapons for self-defense, beyond those few students who were, of course, packing Molotov cocktails and getting ready for the worst.
There have been reports as well that the students took some military men hostage and took some of their equipment as well. Have you seen that?
Yes, when I was leaving the square last night, I saw a busload of very dejected-looking soldiers who had been taken captive by the students. And, of course, the students, having left their friends back on the monument, squarely in the sights of the advancing troops, had no intention of letting them go anytime soon.
All right, thank you very much, Arthur Kent from NBC News, who's in Beijing tonight. By the way, 2 CBS journalists, Richard Roth and Derek Williams, who was his cameraman, were arrested last night by troops and held in detention out of sight of CBS for too long a period of time. We're happy to report today they were released and they are in good health, although Richard Roth did suffer some cuts and a black eye. There are continuing signs of rebellion within the Chinese government. The most stunning example came in a Radio Beijing English language broadcast in which the announcer condemned the bloodbath, which he said killed thousands of people. Listen carefully now, for the broadcast is not perfect.
Good evening. This is Chet Huntley reporting.
Presented by a new formula balm, the effective deodorant that helps keep you dry. And by Denture Cream, only toothpaste powerful enough for dentures. Tonight, report on Cuba, October 23rd, 1962.
At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eastern Daylight Time, the American blockade of Cuba becomes effective. The President issued his formal proclamation tonight. And he authorized Defense Secretary McNamara to use the Army, Navy, and Air Force in any manner necessary. 25 Russian ships are en route to Cuba on what may be a collision course in more than one sense. 2.5 hours ago, Secretary McNamara concluded a news conference.
As I mentioned a moment ago, I can't predict the exact movements of either Soviet ships or U.S. vessels between now and the time that the quarantine becomes effective at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. I can tell you, if it's of interest to you, that we believe there are about 25 Soviet ships moving toward Cuba, merchant ships. We believe that there are some 10 or 12 Soviet ships in Cuban ports. We believe that there are about 25 Soviet ships moving away from Cuba to return to their home ports. Soviet ships are moving in a stream toward Cuba at varying distances and without endeavoring to indicate their space uniformly, they are at such a large number of varying points from Cuba, I can't answer the question other than to say that many are close to the shores of Cuba. The commander of the U.S. vessel involved will act under orders which have been issued by me through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the commanders, Admiral Dennison, and through him to the local ship commanders. These orders prescribe particular procedures to be followed. The essence of them is that the U.S. ship, by every means available to it, will communicate with the Soviet or other vessel involved moving toward Cuba, requesting the vessel to stop and accept inspection and search. If the vessel does not stop, refuses to heed the instructions, force will be applied to assure that it does stop. The minimum amount of force for that purpose will be used, taking care to achieve the minimum damage to the vessel and to the personnel on it.
Will they be armed? Who will make them up, and how will they operate?
The boarding parties will be armed, and they will be made up of personnel from the U.S. Navy and associated Marine forces, and they will be in number sufficient to their task. There are a substantial number of other ships moving toward Cuba at the present time, essentially the same number as have been moving toward Cuba at any other similar time in recent weeks. The movement is not exceptional. It is neither large nor small in relation to the past. We do plan, under the terms of the quarantine, to halt and inspect the cargoes of ships of all nations moving into Cuba.
There were these other developments today. Cuban Premier Fidel Castro told his people that the arms blockade is the most dangerous adventure since World War II. He called President Kennedy a pirate and said a life and death struggle is underway between an empire and the revolution of a small and weak people. The Cuban militia was mobilized and the country was put on a war footing. Havana housewives bought up all available baked goods and candles. Russia alerted its military forces and warned that the United States is playing with fire. At a special session of the United Nations Security Council, the United States, Cuba, and Russia offered separate resolutions and traded bitter charges. The Organization of American States approved the arms quarantine by a vote of 19-0. And in London, 2,000 demonstrators broke through police lines to storm the American embassy.
Our report continues in a minute after this message.